This week's reading is entitled Mountains: Surviving on Mount Everest by Michael Sandler. The genre for this story is informational text. And remember, scholars, informational text gives you facts about a certain subject. As we read, we'll be looking for things such as headings, photographs, captions, graphic features such as maps and diagrams. Climbing Mount Everest. The clock showed almost midnight. The temperature was freezing. Icy winds roared by. A group of people huddled in the darkness on a rocky ridge. In moments, they would begin the final stage of a dangerous journey. They were climbing to the top of Mount Everest, the world's highest mountain. So how do we know, boys and girls, that Mount Everest was very dangerous? What are some of the things that the author tells us? Let's go back and see. Well, the author tells us that the clock showed midnight, which means it was dark. It also tells us that the temperature was freezing, meaning it was very cold. And also, there were icy winds that were blowing. Let's continue. Among the climbers was Temba Shuri Sherpa. 2 weeks before, Temba had celebrated his 16th birthday. Now he was trying to survive in one of the world's most extreme places. Making it to the top of Everest was Temba's dream. He would be the youngest person ever to reach the summit, which is 29,035 feet, 8,850 meters high. What are mountains? Mountains are a type of tall landform. They rise high above the area around them. Mountains are taller than hills. They can rise thousands of feet, kilometers, in the air. They are found all over the world, even beneath the sea. A group of mountains is called a range. The biggest mountain range in North America is the Rocky Mountains. The Andes in South America is the world's longest mountain range. So a question that I have is, how are mountains, landform, and range connected? Well, in the first sentence of paragraph 1, it tells us that mountains are a type of tall landform. In the second paragraph, the first sentence reads, a group of mountains is called a range. So that is how they are connected. And underneath, we see a world map with mountain ranges. Mount Everest, the mountain Temba was climbing, is part of the Himalaya Mountains. The name Himalaya means home of snow. This Asian range is the world's highest. It includes 9 of the 10 tallest mountains on Earth. And beneath here, there's a caption that reads, mountains cover 1/4 of Earth's land surface. Interesting. Mountain conditions. As Temba approached Everest summit, Survival became harder and harder. Mountain conditions get more extreme the higher a person climbs. Air contains less and less oxygen as the altitude increases. Breathing becomes nearly impossible. Thin air can cause headaches and dizziness at 10,000 feet, 3,048 meters. Higher up, it can be deadly. Humans cannot survive for long at the top section of mountains like Everest. Hurricane force winds can reach 130 miles per hour. Temperatures plummet to minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit during the night. Blowing snow makes it hard to see. Temba was headed there. And the caption read, frostbite can happen when it's so cold that hands, feet, and other parts of the body freeze solid. Frostbite can cause people to lose fingers, toes, even noses. Why do people climb mountains? People climb mountains for many reasons. Some enjoy the thrill of being high above the clouds. Others like the challenge of testing their skills. For decades, however, reaching the top of Everest was a test that no climber could pass. The first attempts to climb Everest were made during the 1920s. Again and again, the climbing team stopped short of their goal. Avalanches, storms, sickness, and exhaustion brought them to a halt. Then, in 1953, two climbers finally succeeded. Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. Hillary was from New Zealand. Norgay was a Sherpa from Nepal. Okay, and here we see a picture, and then we'll read the caption to find out what's going on in the picture. Sir Edmund Hillary to the left and Tenzing Norgay to the right show off their survival equipment in 1953. Temba's mistake. Temba had tried to climb Everest before. It ended, however, in failure. I didn't have enough training or proper equipment, Temba said. He was almost at the summit when his oxygen supply ran out. Without oxygen, Temba couldn't think clearly. He made a terrible mistake. He took off his gloves to tie his boots. His fingers froze. Temba suffered frostbite in both hands. He had to turn back just 70 feet from his goal. The next time around, however, Temba was prepared. He had trained hard. He had the right equipment thanks to his classmates and teachers. They had raised money for his trip. So here we see the survival equipment below. And things he needs to survive is a climbing suit to protect against cold, gloves to keep hands warm and dry, goggles to protect eyes from the sun's harmful rays and from reflection off snow, oxygen mask and tank for breathing at the highest altitudes, an ice axe to help climb slopes and break up ice, climbing ropes to climb up slopes, trekking poles to help a climber stay balanced, and mountain boots with spikes that dig into the snow and ice. Camp to camp. Timba's second tribe began in April 2001. Mount Everest sits between Nepal and Tibet. There are several different routes up to the top. Timba would take a route from the north, the Tibetan side. Climbers move from one camp to the next higher one and then rest for a while. At each camp, their bodies get used to the higher altitudes. Timba spent several weeks moving between camps with his team. At Camp 3, the team waited for a break in the weather. Winter was over, but there had been a series of severe snowstorms. Getting caught in a snowstorm further up the mountain would be deadly. Okay, boys and girls, and here we see a photograph that is labeled with base camp down below, and at the top there is the summit or the top of the mountain. The climb up Everest officially begins at base camp. Climbers stay in tents there so their bodies get used to the lower levels of oxygen. The climb along the ridge. On May 20th, Timba's team reached Camp 4. Then the climbers headed out on the great ridge leading to the summit. Timba plunged his axe into ice walls, pulling himself up. He steadied himself against 50-mile-per-hour winds. Yet, he climbed higher and higher. Timba had to move fast or die. Darkness stopped him before he got to Camp 5. His team had gone ahead. Luckily, Timba found a tent. He spent the night frightened and alone. The next day, Timba rejoined his team. They reached Camp 6, one day's climb before their goal. Climbers have to be very careful. Towers of ice can fall without warning. Climbers use aluminum ladders to cross deep cracks in the ice called crevices. The crevices are constantly opening and closing, so it is very dangerous. So boys and girls, if we look at this picture, it helps us better understand the text. Because we are able to see people climbing up the slopes of the mountain with all of their equipment. And we also see that it's not an easy climb up. They're bent over, they have their axes in the snow. So we can tell this is hard work. Reaching the top of the world. Just before midnight, Timba began his final climb. A headlamp lit the darkness. An oxygen mask helped Timba to breathe. Sometimes he'd stop to rest or change oxygen bottles. Just after sunrise, Timba reached Mount Everest summit. He was higher than anyone else on the planet. Temba planted 2 flags. One was for his school, the other was for Nepal. I felt so happy, he said. It is dangerous for climbers to spend more than 10 minutes at the top of Everest. The body needs to get to a lower altitude where there is more oxygen. Here we see a photograph of Temba, and the caption says, Temba was the youngest person to climb Mount Everest. Will the mountain survive? Temba survived in the mountains. Now he wants to make sure the mountains survive. The world's mountains face many different threats. Trash is one problem. For a while, Everest was called the world's highest garbage dump. The mountain was littered with tons of trash that climbers left behind. Batteries, bottles, and empty oxygen tanks. Many climbers didn't have the time or strength to carry these things back down with them. And underneath, we see a photograph of all this trash. Climbers have left garbage on Everest since 1921. Now people are trying to clean up the mess. So here's a question. How does the author support the idea for a while Mount Everest looked like a garbage dump? Well, the text tells us that the mountain was littered with tons of trash that climbers left behind. Batteries, bottles, and empty oxygen tanks. How does the author use the photograph to help connect the text? Well, in the photograph, we see pictures of people cleaning up the mess. We also see a lot of old garbage. Global warming is another problem. As Earth gets warmer, mountain glaciers are melting. Himalayan lakes are swelling up with water. When they flood, mountain landscapes will change forever. In 2005, the snow cap of Tanzania's mountain Kilimanjaro melted for the first time in history. After the climb. When Temba came down from Everest, he was thinking about food, not fame. After weeks of camping, he was starving for home cooking. Still, when he flew home to Kathmandu, a huge crowd was waiting. Temba couldn't believe it. I had never seen so many cameras. All of them were pointed at me, he said. Despite the attention, Temba focused on his schoolwork. He needed to get a good education to achieve his other dream, starting a school in Dolakha. Will Temba succeed? Only time will tell. If you survived on Everest, however, and reached the top, no goal seems too high. So, boys and girls, from this page, how do we know that education is important to Temba? Well, if we go back into the reading, it tells us that Temba focused on schoolwork. He also said that he needed to get a good education to achieve his dream of starting a school in Dolakha. Okay, and here we see Kathmandu is the capital and largest city in Nepal. So that's what that picture is by the caption. And then we see Temba here again. Temba smiled at supporters who greeted him at the Kathmandu airport after he successfully climbed Mount Everest. And it says Temba wearing garlands of flowers around his neck. And that, boys and girls, concludes our story for this week.